Welcome back to Back Points. Our state champion guest today is Paul Bjorlo, one of the legends of the South Lakes wrestling team from Reston, Virginia. He's going to talk about how he went 0-2 as a sophomore, returned to win it all as a junior, and then was upset in the first round of the tournament as a senior, but rallied to come back to place third. It's a great story. Let's jump right in and hear about his journey to a state title.
He taught me to get up when I didn't want to get up, when I wanted to quit.
I had high goals, man. I've always had high goals.
And so when I won it, I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, you guys are right.
It's not the thrill of winning. It's the joy of having that personal goal and being able to achieve that and walk off the mat with your head held high and with your hand up.
You know, you were just constantly drilling fast.
That was when I really started doing the kind of wrestling that I was capable of.
Anybody that steps in the ring and just decides to commit the entire time is a state champion in my book.
Welcome to another episode of Back Points, the podcast where top wrestlers reveal their secrets about how they won state titles in high school. I'm really excited about the podcast today because I'm here interviewing Paul Bjorlo. He was one of the superstars back when I was wrestling. I was a year or two younger than Paul, but I watched him wrestle at the state tournament several times, including the year that he won. And Paul, what year was that you won?
That was the 98-99 season that I won my state title.
Yeah. I remember watching you several other years. I didn't see you all 4 years, but I think I saw you 3 years, and you did well every time.
Well, if you're referring specifically to the state tournament, then the 1 year that you might not have seen me would have been my sophomore year. I was at the state tournament my sophomore year about enough time to have a cup of coffee, and that was about it. I ended up going 0-2 that year after what I felt like was a really strong showing my freshman year, and honestly, my experience that year was a big part of the motivation that I had for my junior year, which is the year that I won states. Basically just being spent 364 days being angry about the way that things had gone the last year, and that actually provided a lot of the motivation that helped me get to where I got the next year. So
all right, let's talk about that. So before we get too far down that road, when did you start wrestling?
I started wrestling when I was a little kid. Started when I was about 6 years old, and stuck with it all the way up through the time that I was wrestling competitively still until the time that I graduated from college.
Okay.
So nice long career.
That's great. And I don't know if I've got good information on this or not, but as I understand it, your father was a concert pianist, and your brother wrestled.
Yeah, I'm impressed. My dad was a pianist. Still plays the piano in his free time for fun. My brother did wrestle. I don't think he chose to stick with it. I think he maybe wrestled. He was 3 years behind me, so he was a freshman when I was a senior. And I can't remember if he wrestled. I know he wrestled his freshman year when I was still on the team. But things that with the team that I was on. We're kind of going downhill a little bit by the time that I had, that I graduated. And I think without me there, I don't know that he really, felt that he wanted to stick with it for the long run, which is too bad. I always give him a hard time because I think if my brother had stuck with it and wanted to be really good, I think he could have been a better wrestler than I was. So I don't know. But yeah, he gave it a shot.
So it's interesting, though, that you say that the team started to kind of come apart a little bit once you left. So what was it like when you were there? And are you referring specifically to South Lakes, your high school team?
Yeah, I just saying that like a lot of the really good practice partners that he would have had access to there graduated with my class. And so I think that if he wanted to kind of stay and try to become a top wrestler, it would have been challenging for him to do that with the practice partners that he had in the room there. And that's not a slight to anyone. It's just a statement of fact, if you ask me.
Yeah, I've seen that, of course, myself, where some younger guys than me came up, and I was very surprised that they did not do much better than I thought they would. And I think the reason was because the room emptied out.
Yeah. And it's tough, you know. I mean, one of the things that I have always stressed as a coach is the importance of taking a serious and focused approach to your daily practice routine. You know, I am a firm believer in the notion that what you do in the practice room is not only is the foundation for, but translates very well to, you know, what is going to happen when you get out there on the mat to compete. You know, and I always like to tell my wrestlers that if you show up every day to practice and you practice like a pud, well, when it's time to compete, you're going to go out and you're going to compete like a pud. So, you know, if you really want to develop as a wrestler, it helps to be in a practice room where you've got strong practice partners, guys that can push you and make you better. And if you don't, it's a lot harder.
So did you have that before high school and during high school? You had, because you started when you were 6. Did you consistently have good practice partners through your whole career?
I was very, very lucky in that regard. You know, when I was my first 4 years or so, I was wrestling for a program that was based in my hometown of Reston, and you know, we practiced over at South Lakes High School, so I got pretty familiar with South Lakes even before I was a student there. And then my 5th grade year was my first year wrestling with a team called the Bandits. And if you know, I don't remember if you grew up, if you're from around this area, Will, I know you were for high school. If you were around at all before that and involved with wrestling, then you probably would have crossed paths with, you know, the Bandits or with one of the Bandits at some point. And so, you know, from basically my 5th grade to my 8th grade year, the 4 years leading up to high school, I was in a room full of, you know, some of the best wrestlers in the Northern Virginia area. And that was, I think, a big part of what contributed to my development as a wrestler. And I was pretty lucky in that regard when I got to high school too. My freshman year in high school, I had a really good close friend who was my practice partner, still, you know, to this day, a good friend of mine, guy by the name of Matt Sanders. Tough wrestler. I think I want to say he took 5th or 6th in the state at 135 his senior year. And he was about 10 pounds above me when I was a freshman, and he used to just beat the heck out of me every day. And that helped a lot. And then, you know, my sophomore and junior years, I had a coach who had been a wrestler at George Mason, who I worked out with a good bit. And, you know, that also helped me make, you know, pretty significant gains. And so, you know, there's direct proof that if you got good practice partners, generally speaking, your chances for improving are going to be better, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, so you said you worked out at the South Lakes, in the South Lakes wrestling room before, was that before Bandits? So it was.
This is youth league. This is like 1st grade through 4th grade, basically.
Okay. Gotcha. So then when you got into Bandits, I have heard about Bandits. I started wrestling in 9th grade, so I didn't really have that experience in youth wrestling, but
right.
My friend Pete Zaffros was involved in Bandits, who I think you might have wrestled with.
I know Pete very well. Yep.
Yeah. And so what was the structure of the Bandits practice room? Was there structured drilling, instruction, free wrestling? You know, what was it like in the Bandits room?
You know, it was a combination of all of those things. You know, we had kind of some staple techniques that we did and drilled a lot of. You know, we used a lot of you know, kind of sit out, turn in, shrug, Granby series, things like that. And, you know, we drilled those a lot. Did a good bit of live wrestling as well. And conditioning was another part of our focus. You know, one of the things that I always took pride in, when I was in really good shape, I felt like I could kind of, you know, go with anybody from a cardio standpoint. And then that's one of the things that I think if you are serious about wrestling and you're serious about wanting to maximize your potential as a wrestler, good cardio and training and preparing to be in good shape and being ready to go when the 3rd period starts is tremendously, tremendously important.
Yeah, I agree completely. What was one of your secrets for cardio? Did you do cardio year round? Did did you do extra workouts on your own?
It depends on what point in my career we're talking about there. When I did, I'd go out when I did the bulk of my extra workouts in high school was usually when I was losing weight. I didn't. I kind of just did, my one practice. I didn't do extra drills or extra practices or anything like that. I'd go out running on my own when I had weight that I needed to lose, and that, kind of helped me with my cardio from that standpoint. The rest of it was just busting my tail when I was in the practice room, trying to get the most that I could out of every rep, trying to push myself and work as hard as I could. And that was kind of where most of my cardio came from.
Okay. In terms of your strength training and your cardio before high school, did you do anything specifically that you feel like contributed a lot to your development from a physical perspective?
Not that I can think of when it comes, like, if you're talking about lifting weights or anything like that. Not really. I did push-ups and pull-ups and a lot of body weight exercises, but I didn't really start doing a whole lot of serious weight training, I'd say, until probably after I was in high school. And even then, it was mostly just sort of, stuff that I did with the wrestling team or with the football team, and lifting during the off season on my own. But I never had any kind of like focused like strength training plan that I stuck to in the summer. I just kind of, would get into the gym or into the wrestling room, get in whatever workout that I could. And that was sort of where it came from.
Okay. So when it came to winning the state tournament, was that a goal that you set early on? Did you set it consciously as a goal?
Yes, definitely. And I remember, it's funny, when I was in middle school, I had a shop teacher by the name of Ed Bishop. Don't ask me how I remember that name. I had known his family forever. His son, Ryan, was a state champ, I believe, for Stonewall Jackson, maybe the year before I won my title. And so I remember, like, when I was in 8th grade, his son, I want to say he had an older son that was competing in the state tournament, and he brought me back a copy of the program from the state tournament. And I remember looking through it and seeing all of the top wrestlers from Northern Virginia, they would go down to states like in the early to mid 90s and just get hammered, by your Great Bridges and your Western Branch and things like that. I mean, I know in the early 90s, Centerville had a real powerhouse team, and so they were probably giving out some of those beatdowns as well. But when I was just getting started in high school wrestling, the beach area was the powerhouse in wrestling, and a lot of the top guys from Northern Virginia would go down to the beach and just get destroyed at the state tournament. And I remember looking at that program thinking, like, man, if I'm gonna get to the top of this hill, I got some work to do. And so I'd say that was kind of the first time that I really ever started thinking about it consciously. But yeah, it was always something that I had in mind as something I would like to have accomplished.
Did it always seem attainable to you?
Great question. No, it didn't. After my sophomore year, when I went 0-2 and had one of the worst tournaments of my entire life, it did not seem attainable to me. I was like, I want to win this tournament, and I came down and went 0-2. Like, something's going to have to change here. So yeah, there were some points at which I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it, or wasn't sure that I was going to get there, and that was challenging.
So let's dig into that. So what happened your sophomore year?
That's a great question. I think it was a bunch of different things. I think part of it was that I didn't prepare well enough for the tournament. I think I kind of assumed that based on how I had done the previous year, that I was going to improve, and that I was going to certainly be on the medal stand, and it was just a question of how high. And so I walked in, I had won the region, I was the North 1, and went down and hit the Northwest 4 in the first round. And, if you just look at the seed, Usually, you look at that and say, okay, well, this shouldn't be a terribly tough match. But at the state tournament, as you know, pretty much every match is a tough match. So I stepped out on the mat for that first match and just didn't really have my game face on and didn't wrestle a great match and lost to a wrestler from Garfield who had wrestled a really good tough match against me, and all the credit in the world to him. But I just didn't really have my best match that match, and I dropped down into the consies and wrestled against a kid who also in my part of the bracket had been upset in the first round, and I think I ended up losing that match like 5-3. And so 0-2 and all done with the state tournament my sophomore year was pretty tough experience.
Yeah, so it sounds like a tough experience. It's a common experience, and it sounds to me like maybe there was some overconfidence, a little bit of you came in expecting certain things and maybe,
yep,
but not having the focus you needed to really wrestle to your peak.
I'd say all of that is accurate.
Now, what about your training that whole year? Like, was it an issue of not being prepared on the day when you lost, or was it also maybe you could have trained harder that year? You could have been more focused all season. I mean, you won the region, so you didn't have a bad season going in necessarily.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, for the most part, I felt pretty good about my training that year. Like I said, my sophomore and junior years, I had a coach at South Lakes with me that had a coach that had wrestled for George Mason. And the head coach had actually, I think, done a post-grad year at Blair Academy when he was younger. So, I mean, these are good wrestlers that knew what they were doing. And most of the time they were my practice partners. So at least when it came to live wrestling, I had like other people that I'd drill with and everything. But yeah, it wasn't for lack of, live competition or good partners in the practice room that my sophomore year didn't go the way that I wanted it to. I think it was more a result of the things that you described earlier. I don't think it's as much about my lack of preparation as much as it was my kind of overconfidence and thinking that, I could only do better because I finished 5th as a freshman in a really tough weight class. And I think a lot of what happened for me that year was mental. Yeah,
that makes sense. So then what happened after you lost, you felt terrible. What did you, and then you used it as motivation, you said. So what happened after you lost?
So after I lost, I decided that I didn't ever want to feel the way that I was feeling as a result of that tournament ever again. And I mean it, sincerely when I say I spent the next 364 days really pissed off and angry about how that tournament had played out and about my, underperformance. I mean, there's no other way to say it, at least the way that I felt about it. And so every single time I lifted in the off season, every single time I worked out or wrestled or did anything to do with freestyle, any time I was on the mat, I was thinking about that and kind of, I think, using that to sort of make sure that I was working as hard as I needed to be and getting the most out of every rep that I had in practice. And I just, I was angry for the entire year until it came to the state tournament the next year. And I think, without everything that had happened my sophomore year, as difficult as it was to deal with, I think in the end it was good because it was a big part of what helped me reach, the goal that I had set out to accomplish that next year, my junior year.
Yeah. So then what happened senior year?
Oh man, how much time you got here?
Just keep going.
Senior year was different. That year my coach, the coaches that I had who were with Mason ended up leaving and going to take other jobs in other places. And a lot of the guys that I had been practicing and working out with for years, in the time leading up to my senior year had graduated. Okay. So I was the older guy in the room. And I think it was kind of the same thing there, where like most of that season I maybe didn't work as hard as I probably should have, because it's like, well, you've already won states, so hopefully if things go the way that they should, you'll go back and win again the next year, and it didn't play out that way. I basically got down to the state tournament after what had been a very inconsistent senior year. A lot of close matches with wrestlers that I wouldn't necessarily have expected close matches with. I was not in as good a shape my senior year as I think I probably should have been. And I think it was a number of things. But again, the other thing that definitely contributed to it was the mental aspect of it. I remember being so nervous about the first two matches that I wrestled down there. And both of them were close. One of them went, I think, to like double or triple overtime or something like that. I was wrestling against a kid from Deep Creek my senior year, and I think the quarterfinals. Really big, strong, stocky kid, and those were the kind of wrestlers that I always had trouble with. Mm-hmm. And he gave me a really tough time, and I when I think back on that tournament, what I remember thinking about it is that I was wrestling not to lose instead of wrestling to win. And I still remember, like, I ended up losing in the semifinals to a kid from Great Bridge, J.C. Cuffey. It was a really tight match until right at the end. He ended up getting a takedown with, probably 10 or 15 seconds left, and I wasn't able to level a score after that. He ended up winning and going on to win the state title in the weight class that year. And I remember after I dropped down into the consies, that was really when the tournament started for me. Or at least when I felt like I started wrestling, because, after that, like after I dropped down to the consies and got beat and didn't have it in my head anymore that I was trying to defend a title instead of trying to win a title, I just kind of let things go, and I got down there realizing that I didn't have anything to lose and just wrestled. And that was when I really started doing the kind of wrestling that I was capable of, and that, I think if I had been doing for the entire tournament, probably would have had another state title to show for it. But I chalk a lot of that up to the mental aspect of the sport as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So what do you say to a kid, because you're coaching now? What do you say to a kid who's in a similar spot where you see him and you can see that he's hesitating, he's maybe a little bit inhibited, and you think he's wrestling not to lose, maybe he's nervous? What do you say to a kid, based on your experience?
That's a tough question to answer, and I think that the answer is going to vary depending on the kid that you're having that conversation with, right? On the mental makeup of the kid, and on what you think they can handle, or what you think that they can best respond to. But what I would be inclined to say to a wrestler in that position is, just let it go, stop thinking. I think that when I have always felt like I did my best wrestling when I wasn't really thinking, when I was just feeling and reacting. And I think that it's a lot of kids have a tendency to just get so much into their own head that it interferes with their ability to do their best wrestling. And so when you run into that as a coach, at least what I have tried to do is, you try to kind of reassure, you try to encourage them to relax and to just wrestle and feel it. And it's hard, but that's a tough conversation to have with a kid. And, if you end up spending any significant time as a coach, if you end up sticking with this, you're going to find the same thing out, and you're going to have some of those conversations with kids as well. And they're they can be challenging.
Yeah, one thing that I think about is, so sometimes we try to solve a lot of problems on the day of the match. And I'm a believer that a lot of problems can't be solved at that minute before they walk out. But
totally agree.
But you could say, talk to kids about not being afraid of making mistakes, not being afraid, and kind of on an ongoing basis. Now, I'm not sure. I don't think there's any one magic answer to solve this problem of feeling inhibited and wrestling not to lose. But I do think that perhaps talking about it in advance, only so much I think can be solved on game day.
For sure. I agree with you. And what we always talk to and I think that kind of speaks directly about like a philosophy that we always preach to our wrestlers that I kind of touched on earlier, but and that being that like every single rep that you get in practice is the foundation for how you're going to wrestle when you actually get out on the mat. If you're where I would argue, and I'm sure you would probably agree with this, the championship wrestlers are made is through the drilling and the repetition and the building of muscle memory that kind of helps you with the technique that you need, and then with the strength and cardio training that gives you the strength and conditioning that you need to be successful. And that is not stuff that that is stuff that is going to make or break what happens on the day of a match. Whereas like one little piece of last second coaching or something like that may influence an outcome slightly, but it's not going to make a significant difference, I don't think, in who is the winner or the loser of the match. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I can think of a handful of matches where it did make a difference, but it would be, under 10%, a few matches out of 100.
Yeah.
And, it's an important part of wrestling, I think, but because I think every little bit helps. But I completely agree that your wrestling career is going to be defined by your practices, your drilling, your strength training, all of those things that go into that.
Yep. Yeah. And, another part of the conversation, or another thing that we like to tell our wrestlers, is that it goes by fast. It comes and goes. And I'm sure you remember, from the time that you were in high school, you set foot in the practice room, day one of your freshman year, and all of a sudden you're doing your last practice as a senior, getting ready for the state tournament. And it's like, where the heck did the time go? It flies. There's not a lot there. And so if you really want to make the most of the time that you got there, it's important that you take every single practice, every single workout, every single opportunity for every rep seriously and make the most out of it,
Yeah. So for your senior, so I understand your sophomore year and your junior year. Your senior year, I think I understand a lot as well, but for your senior year, you were at a bit of a disadvantage because you didn't have the same coaches, you didn't have the same people in the wrestling room in general. What would you have done differently, though, or what could you have done differently your senior year if knowing what you know now and how things turned out? What would you have done differently if you would have
a better focus on cardio? I think would have helped at least a little bit. I didn't necessarily feel like I was out of shape my senior year, but I don't feel like I was in the best shape that I could possibly have been in, Yeah. And I think if any wrestler that wants to maximize their potential, their competitive potential, one of their focal points, I think, should be getting in the best cardio shape that they can possibly be in. Because I know you've seen this before too, but there are plenty of matches that are won and lost in the third period. And a lot of the ones that come down to the real tight, narrow margins that you see at some of the higher levels of competition are going to be won by the wrestler that A, and I think most importantly, wants it more, and B is ready to answer the bell when the third period starts. And so I think that like getting in better cardio shape maybe could have helped me. It's hard to say beyond that. I mean, I honestly think that so much of what happened to me my senior year had to do with my mindset, and the approach that I took into preparing for that tournament. It's hard to look back and say like I would have done this different or I would have done that different. I think maybe a little bit more working out on my own probably could have helped. But most of the working out that I did came during the practice windows, and I know that for a lot of the top wrestlers, whether you're talking about high school or whatever level, if you want to get to the top of your level, you got to be willing to outwork the people that you're competing against. And I think that getting in for extra workouts and doing stuff on your own time is a kind of great way to put in some extra work on that front. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, did you take nutrition seriously when you were wrestling?
Nutrition, did you say?
nutrition. Yeah, did you take nutrition into account?
I took it into account, yes. Would I say that I took it seriously? No, not really. And the reason that I say that, part of it is that they just didn't have as many resources, when I was in high school as they have now. But the other part of it is that I never, with the exception of my junior year, I was never really cutting a whole lot of weight. And so I didn't really focus on consuming foods that would help me build muscle and strength and give me energy for practice workouts as much as I did just, try to make sure that whatever I ate wasn't going to send me up to the next weight class. And my senior year, I really wasn't cutting a whole lot of weight. So that wasn't, and same thing with my sophomore year. So those 2 years, that wasn't a really big issue for me.
So you went on to wrestle in college, and you won, if I'm not mistaken, I think you won an ACC title, right?
I did, yeah. My senior year, my 5th year, I was able to win an ACC title. Yeah,
that's great. What felt better, winning a state title in high school or the ACC title?
Oh man, they were both pretty sweet. Hard to say. I guess the state tournament, my in high school was, I think at that point it was the biggest tournament that I had ever won. So in that sense, that was very cool. I was very, very proud of that. But obviously the conference tournament at the collegiate level is it's a step up. It's tougher competition and everything. Those two tournaments are definitely the two that I look back on my entire wrestling career with probably the fondest memories of with those two tournaments right there. It's hard to say. I don't know. I've never really thought about which one I was more excited about before. It's an interesting question.
Okay, so I've got one more question here. Did you have any pre-match rituals that you followed before?
Pre-match that I followed. So not that I can think of offhand. When I was competing, one of the things that I always stress, and I guess this is for any serious wrestler, I'd say this should be part of your pre-match ritual, but is a great warm-up. I have always felt like when I step out on the mat without getting a really good warm-up in, I feel a little bit flat in that first match. It's almost like when you haven't really fully opened your lungs up and gotten a good hard, I like to call it a good hard blow, but like just really opening your lungs, getting your air, your wind going really hard, and breaking a good sweat. I always felt like I was much sharper, like I was much quicker, much more effective when I got a good warm up before I wrestled. And that is something that we are constantly stressing to our wrestlers, is the importance of getting a good, strong, hard warm up in before they set foot on the mat. And then eating right, like it took me a long time. My first 3 years of college, I was wrestling 149 at UVA, and I think I cracked the starting lineup sort of as a part-timer my sophomore year, and then a full-timer my third year. I redshirted my freshman year and was there for a 5th year, so I ended up doing 5 years there. I was, for the first couple years there, I was really struggling to make the weight that I was wrestling, which is 149. And so getting kind of a pre-match routine down when it came to eating was very important for me, because I had to find that balance of like making sure that I felt like I had energy, but also making sure that I felt like I hadn't overeaten and I was going to spew all over the mat when the whistle blew, So making sure that you have kind of like a routine as far as like what you eat, what you need to put in your system to feel good and put your best foot forward on the mat. That's sort of the other thing that I would suggest focusing on as far as any kind of pre-match routine goes. And I think if you do those two things, then, by the time you step out on the mat, you're probably good to go.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Paul. This is really great. So thank you so much. I know that the next generation is going to benefit both from your coaching as well as from the wisdom you've imparted here today. So thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Will.
Thanks for listening to Backpoints today. If you want to support the show, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you find the show. Also, it helps us if you give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Feel free to also make a donation via Patreon at patreon.com/backpoints. Thanks, and see you next episode.